Hello everyone, how you guys doing? Hope you guys are having a wonderful day. Today we're here with another video, and this will be one of me more creating a conversation. So if you do disagree with anything that I say, feel free to leave it in the comments down below. Try to be constructive and create a conversation more so, as this is what the video is intended to do. I'm not trying to demean anyone that plays the game, however you play the game, or Jagex either. I just am trying to make us all aware of the situation around us and try and see what we can come up with going forward. With that said, let's go ahead and get on into the video. So now going back to when it all began, it was 2012, November to be exact, and Jagex had released the Evolution of Combat. There had been betas leading up to this and people knew what to expect. The game was going to change entirely. The combat system was going from the old standard hit-based RNG to your more involved keyboard-based gameplay. And this was probably the first domino to fall in the release of old school Runescape. Up until this point, the game had changed so much from what people knew as kids that, for the most part, unless you've played it the entire time, it was quite hard to get back into. Games like this always have this problem when there's too much content in the game to really be able to get a good understanding of where you stand. So in 2013, whenever Jagex decided to release a poll asking the player base if they would like to have an old school RuneScape version of the game, everyone came together, 400,000 plus people, and said that that was what they wanted to do. They felt like making a new game would be the best option for them as players, and they hoped that it would be able to come into fruition. Now with that said, the players got what they want. Jagex decided that with 400,000 plus votes, it was obviously going to happen, and they were going to release an old version of the game. Now at the time, they said that this was going to be with no increased membership. However, it could be in 6 months if the player base declined drastically. This stipulation really shows how little confidence Jagex had in old school RuneScape, and really shows how successful relative to its start point it has been to this day. It's been a really good game, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about today is where is old school RuneScape going now? It all starts back when old school RuneScape was released in the spring of 2013. The game was fresh, it was new, it was beautiful times to play. I remember logging on as soon as the game was released and just seeing thousands of people flood into the game, and just so many noobs running around trying to do everything they could to be better than one another, looking at the high scores and seeing people fight each other. It was such a great time, and really over time the game kind of settled itself out. It was still really fun, it was early times of the games, people were being the first to do certain things, and it was a really great time. Now with that said, Jagex initially said that there were not going to be any major game-changing updates for the most part. They provided a small content team, mostly for bug fixes and other sorts of improvements within the game, with small content changes probably to come in the future. The first content change being God War's Dungeon. As old school RuneScape was released in 2007's version, it was released earlier than God War's Dungeon had been out, about a month prior. So Jagex felt like God War's Dungeon was one of their best updates, and they decided that it was relevant in the old school format, considering a lot of people wanted this, and most people that ended up playing old school RuneScape had been playing during the time where God War's Dungeon was a prominent thing within the game. Now really, this could be the beginning of what we see today. Initially, whenever old school RuneScape was announced, content changes were supposed to come in minimal fashion. Slowly over time, as the player base became more and more consistent and ever growing, Jagex decided it was important to bring more and more people onto the old school RuneScape squad. Now with that said, if you have employees, you have to do something with them, and instead of improving the gameplay itself, Jagex decides that the more appropriate approach to bring is the approach of introducing new content within the game that pretty much extinguishes old content. This is one of the problems that old school RuneScape faces, along with what the live game faced, and one of the reasons I can personally never even log on that game, because there's too much going on. There's so much new content that ends up killing old content. There's no way to know what's really going on within the game and what to do unless you're within that loop. And this really ends up creating what we can see as just an endless cycle. Really, as soon as people fall out of the game, they feel less and less obligated to come back, as they don't enjoy the game for the actual playability itself. They enjoy it more for the nostalgia and the feeling of playing the game. And this is a problem you face as a game that relies on content rather than actual playability. And the reason I say this is, more than likely, people don't enjoy the act of clicking on an oak tree. You could be clicking on anything in any game, but instead you're clicking on one oak tree tree and then waiting 30 seconds or so for it to fall. That content isn't enjoyable, it's more so the game itself. Now, while people may say that they actually do enjoy woodcutting and stuff like that, you probably more so enjoy the grind than you actually do the activity itself. The idea of me sitting at a computer and clicking once and waiting a minute and then clicking again is not an enjoyable activity. However, if you enjoy the grind itself, that's great, but any game can create a grind if it wants to. That doesn't make a game stand out. So with the release of God Wars Dungeon, we really opened up the old school RuneScape floodgates in terms of new content. There was really nothing that was off boundaries. Jagex has already shown through releasing God Wars Dungeon that they aren't too strict on keeping that form of the game, and over time player polls are introduced within the game, initially for minor changes, but then inevitably getting to more and more important updates. Now throughout the years, if you're someone that has played the live game as well as old school RuneScape, you are seeing the natural progression of the game, and really we're starting to appear on what I think as the 2013 of the live game. What ends up happening as we play the game that we all know and love, we do enjoy the initial feel of old school RuneScape. However, over time, content changes need to be improved within the game, thus creating a need for new items within certain slots to be better than others. However, the problem that you face with this is by improving one, over time you're going to have to improve them all, and once that happens, you do reach a point where you're going to have to improve one over what the improvement already was, and this cycle is very vicious, and it starts to detract from where the game actually came from. Now personally, I feel as if that is where we are reaching now. Stuff is coming into the game that we saw already in the live game, and things are constantly being improved to the point where this isn't going to be the game we all signed up to play for. And while I do enjoy it currently, I don't know how much longer it can go on. Now, I'm not saying by any means that RuneScape's going to die in the next couple months. Obviously, there's a wonderful player base, it's doing perfectly fine, and I personally enjoy the game right now. However, as the RuneScape player base gets older and older, for the most part, we're probably all about 20 years old, some older, some younger, I'm sure, but probably more so older. We're all going to be moving into different parts of our lives where we're not going to be as much obligated to play a game that has changed so much from what we initially saw. Now, this is the problem that I see, is that I don't know if we're releasing updates into the game too early for old school RuneScape. Just by improving things within the game, you're inevitably just crawling towards the end. I say this coming from the point of view that I believe most people that still play this game play it for the nostalgic purposes and for the community. As the game becomes less and less what it used to be and more into this new entity, a lot of people are turned off by that, and that is really where I'm coming from through this. Now with that said, I don't think RuneScape's dying tomorrow. As I said earlier this video, I think it's a great game. However, the problem that I see is really there is an end point. There is an end where this is all going to come together and we're going to say this is way too different than the game we signed up for, and at that point I really don't know what we can do. Now, the reason that old school RuneScape was released was for the fact that the combat system was just nasty. The EOC combat system was awful, but even up until then you heard tons of people complaining and wanting old school RuneScape for several different reasons. While the evolution of combat may have been the one to push it over the edge, it really isn't the only factor. A lot of people didn't like graphically where the game was going, which was understandable, and a lot of people didn't like the new content being put into the game. As soon as you have new stuff being put into the game, you end up with way too many variations of things that you just can't prepare for. Like PKing in the wilderness and being hit by a Karasi sword with a 50 from a magic attack is something that is absolutely frustrating to deal with, and it really makes you think of where the game was in 2013 compared to where it was in 2007. Now, you guys may be wondering what my personal opinions are on ways that RuneScape can improve the overall gameplay, and this is going to be something that is it does ask a lot of the company as a whole, and obviously they might not have the ability to be able to do these things, so it may be something I'm wishing for, knowing that they might not be able to, but this is pretty much what I see of this game and what I think needs to happen. So first off, the one thing that I think needs to be in the game, and I know it sounds extremely weird, but I think mini games are actually a fun thing to do. I think adding more mini games is of utmost importance. Skills that are like awful to train, such as mining, woodcutting. I mean, they're not awful, but there's no fun. There's no like you don't enjoy that. I believe mini games should be added in some sort of format like Wintertot. Even though Wintertot is much more like grindy, there's still something to it that's enjoyable, and I feel like more mini games need to be introduced that are vital to the game's importance and your progression within the game. Mini games like combat mini games such as Tears of Gothics really can become dead content very quickly, as there are already too many combat related mini games, so I feel as if that is not necessary at all. Another thing that I think needs to happen is I think RuneScape needs to relax with the overall amount of updates that they put out. While I do love a game that can actually show that they appreciate their players and put out constant updates, I think that putting out too many inevitably reaches the end of the game. Once the game becomes too much different than what it originally was, people that play it for nostalgic purposes will leave, and as player bases decline, more and more people will see it's a dying game and leave as well. Now, that's not something I'm promoting, however, I'm saying it's something that happens. So now on to the last one. This one's not as practical, however, a fun thought scenario that I have been thinking of a lot in the past. So while this isn't practical now, as we are 3.5 years into old school RuneScape, it would have been a really fun strategy had JX employed this from the beginning. Something that we all see with hardcore Ironmen and ultimate Ironman and Deadman mode. We see the fun that people get whenever everyone's starting off from a blank level and they're trying to beat each other to things. It's a very enjoyable thing to do. It's very good for the community, I feel like, as there is a lot of camaraderie during these times. And something I think JX could have done to better this once they knew that this was going to be a consistent game was not let it get to this point where you're introducing new content over what was already new content. You run into trouble there, as I've explained already. However, what would be really fun and interesting would be to put RuneScape on an annual or biannual standard where the game's released on January 1st of one year, and then a year later from that it is reset. Now, the fun in this comes more from the fact of everyone trying to fight out each other to do things first and just trying to see where you can go. Now, the one thing that you do have to do here is the games have to be different. You can't just create the same game and then reset it every year. That's not fun. What I think would be the enjoyable part about this would be with the content creation team that JX has at the beginning of every year to actually just create a new game the next year. There are so many things that you'd be able to do differently, and it would be really fun and interesting to see where each game goes compared to the last game. Now, that's obviously a very far-stretched scenario. It's not worked out to the fullest, like I don't have a blueprint of this, but the concept of it is something that's always intrigued me and I thought would be something I'd share with you guys. Alright, so hopefully you guys enjoyed the video and enjoyed listening to my comments on where I think the game's going and what I think they could do to fix it. It really is an enjoyable conversation if you make fun with it. If you try to be negative about it, then it can be really negative and this can be really toxic. However, for the most part, I'm trying to encourage a really good conversation. I feel like there's a lot of questions that can be asked. Jesus Christ, people in their cool cars. And a lot of thoughts that can be put out there to help improve the game. Now, hopefully we can start a conversation like that in the comments down below, and you guys can start it by leaving a comment now as far as what you feel like would be best for old school RuneScape going forward, and really what the most enjoyable thing about the game is for you. One of the things I took into consideration in this video is that I have a pretty good understanding of what the community thinks. However, that could just be entirely wrong. So with that said, I appreciate you guys for viewing the video. If you guys want to leave a like or a subscription down below, either of those would help me out. And on top of that, you can join my clan chat in-game Smallexplamp, or you can even hit up a Twitter link or Discord link in the description down below. But with that said, hopefully you guys have a wonderful day, and peace.